seems like I forgot to start a recording for this lecture. I've started recording now. So I'm going to share the screen so you can see the video.
Good morning. Are we alone? Do we live in a universe that is populated with many, many intelligent species? Or are we, as human beings, just the only intelligent life anywhere in the universe? The last couple of centuries have been a triumph of modern astronomy. We can now trace back the history of the universe to just seconds after the Big Bang, when our universe began. We can watch the cosmic microwave background and map out the structure of the very early universe. We can track the very first stars that formed in the first few hundreds of millions of years after the universe was born. We can track the formation of galaxies. We understand nearly everything that there is to know about the way that the universe was born and the way that the universe continues to evolve, except for one very glaring exception: life. We know that in the very first few hundreds of millions of years after the Earth formed, life arose on our planet. We know that from fossils like these, stromatolites, that were formed by the very first organisms that existed on our planet, cyanobacteria. So very, very quickly, as soon as the Earth cooled off after its formation, we know that life began here. And even more amazing than the fact that a self-replicating organism somehow came forth amidst the laws of thermodynamics that govern our universe, that life evolved fantastic complexity, and in fact, eventually evolved intelligence. Amazingly enough, we now know that nearly every single star in our galaxy hosts a planet. And something like 1 in 5 of those stars hosts a planet something like the Earth, at just the right distance from the star to have liquid water exist on the surface. But on any of those planets, did life arise? Did something similar to what happened on our own planet happen on those other planets? We know that the galaxy is awash in water. It's awash in organic molecules and complex chemistry. All of the things that we know were necessary for life to begin on this planet exist in abundance throughout the galaxy. But did life ever arise on any of those planets? And even more pressing of a question, did that life, if it did arise, did it ever go on to develop intelligence? Is intelligence a common outcome of life? Is intelligence a driven process? Does life proceed towards intelligence for some reason that we don't yet understand? Or is intelligence simply some evolutionary fluke that only happened on one single planet that maybe did develop life? And again, even more interesting, if intelligence does arise commonly, how far can technology progress? How advanced could very advanced life become? The universe is nearly 14 billion years old, and our galaxy is something like 12 billion years old. So there could be life out there, if it evolved intelligence, that could be dramatically more advanced than the life that we have here on this planet. Now, we don't have any way of directly detecting intelligent life, so we use technology, or can use technology, as a proxy for intelligence. Here on this planet, we have been producing technology that has been emitting signals that would be detectable at very, very large distances, well out into the galaxy, for hundreds of years. These are things like high-power TV and radio transmitters that we use for communication systems here on Earth, radars that we use to map other planets in our solar system, or asteroids that we have in our own solar system, and also laser technology. Now, we don't do this yet here on our planet, but it's an amazing fact that if you take our most powerful lasers and our largest mirrors and you pair them together, for the fraction of a second that our most powerful lasers can produce light, they can outshine the sun by factors of 1,000 and more than 1,000 light years away. We have just announced a brand new program that we think is going to be humanity's best chance ever to answer this question. It's called Breakthrough Listen. It's humanity's boldest attempt ever to determine whether or not we are alone as intelligent beings. It's a $100 million 10-year project that will use 3 telescopes to conduct the most comprehensive, sensitive, and intensive search for extraterrestrial intelligence in history. We're going to use optical telescopes, one called the Automated Planet Finder that is just about an hour away from here near San Jose at Lick Observatory, and 2 of the world's largest radio telescopes, the Parkes Telescope in Australia near Sydney, and the Green Bank Telescope in West Virginia here in the United States. The Green Bank Telescope is one of the world's largest movable structures, and it is in fact the largest fully steerable antenna that we have here on this planet. With a telescope like the Green Bank Telescope, we could detect a human-like technology nearly to the center of the galaxy. We're going to search a variety of different types of objects. We're going to conduct a survey of 1 million stars within about 1,000 light years or so of the Earth. We're going to conduct a comprehensive survey of the entire plane of our Milky Way galaxy, and we're going to search 100 nearby galaxies to see if that very, very advanced life might have developed the necessary technology to transmit at truly extraordinary distances between galaxies. Let's take a look at how that's going to work. Here's an animation of the Milky Way galaxy. Imagine that somewhere in the Milky Way galaxy, intelligent life arises and begins to transmit. If they did so, their transmissions would proceed at the speed of light out from their star for as long as that intelligent life existed. And that would form a bubble of electromagnetic radiation that we might be able to detect here on Earth. But how long do these civilizations live? They might develop life, intelligent life, and then some technology and a radio signal. But that radio signal will only continue to emit for as long as the civilization lives. But these bubbles of electromagnetic radiation continue out into the galaxy at the speed of light. And here on Earth, we can potentially detect those with our very, very large radio telescopes. So here's the Earth. It's self-transmitting electromagnetic radiation, radio signals. And here are these bubbles of radiation from signals from other intelligences that are sweeping across the Earth. And we can detect those, again, with telescopes like the Green Bank Telescope here. And this is an animation of the signal that we might expect to see from that civilization. And also with the Parkes Telescope in Australia. And it's not just us that's going to be doing the data analysis. With Breakthrough Listen, there is a very key component of the program that will make all of the data that we collect available to the public immediately. It will, in fact, when complete, be the largest amount of scientific data that's ever been made available to the public for any experiment whatsoever. And this is one of the ways that you can get involved in that program with an application developed here at Berkeley called SETI at Home. This is a program that you can download on your computer, and when you're not using your computer, when you're getting up to get a cup of coffee, if you take long enough, your computer will wake up, it'll download a little bit of the data that we collected at these giant radio telescopes, and use your computer to do the very computationally intensive processing that's required to detect these very weak signals that we're looking for. And your computer will join with hundreds of thousands of other computers and will in fact form the largest supercomputer on the entire planet Earth, dedicated solely to hunting for evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence. And here's a video showing how this process works. Here we see at Berkeley, California, where we all are here, all of the data that we collect from these telescopes being sent out to hundreds of thousands of volunteers, and then results of those computations being sent back to us at Berkeley. And if one of those little blue dots comes from your computer and happens to contain evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence, you too will share in the Nobel Prize that we will surely win. But I warn you, you have to share it with the hundreds of thousands of other volunteers that participated in the project. So you might only get a couple of nickels. But surely it would be one of the most remarkable discoveries in the history of humanity. So I wanted to take a minute to look back briefly at one of the still images from the video that I showed you. to point out something very, very remarkable about the search for extraterrestrial intelligence and something that we do in this science. So here we see the bubbles of electromagnetic radiation coming out from the civilizations that may exist somewhere in our Milky Way galaxy. And these bubbles of electromagnetic radiation, they have fixed widths. They don't, they're not constant. And that reflects the lifetime of the civilizations that might be arising. And this is something that's captured in a very, very famous equation in this field called the Drake equation, named after Frank Drake, one of the pioneers of this field. And I promise that this is the most complicated bit of mathematics that I'll show you today, but I think it's worthwhile to take a minute to walk through this. So this equation here, n, is the number of civilizations that we might be able to detect. And it's expressed as a product of all of the factors that might go into the emergence of intelligent life. R star, the rate of star formation in our galaxy. Fp, the fraction of those stars that have planets. Ne, the fraction of those that are something like the Earth. Fl, the fraction of those that actually develop life. Fi, the fraction of those that actually go on to develop intelligence. Fc, the factor of those intelligent species that go on to develop some kind of communication technology that we might be able to detect. But perhaps the most interesting factor in this equation is L, the lifetime of the civilization. How long can an intelligent, communicative civilization actually exist? Now, if we look at our own technology and our own human society, we might ask the question, well, maybe not very long, maybe only a few hundred years. Can a truly advanced technology exist for thousands and thousands of years without destroying themselves? This is something that we're able to probe directly in our experiments to search for intelligent life. We're now just beginning to explore the area around our own planet. In 100 years, surely the area around our planet is going to be populated with innumerable satellites, communication technology. Perhaps we'll visit the moon again. Perhaps we'll have a colony on Mars. Maybe in 1,000 years, we might actually have permanent colonies in space. We can sort of imagine getting that far with our own current technology. But where might we be in the far future? Can we, as human beings, exist long enough to actually travel between the stars? Could our technology progress far enough that we could actually become an interstellar civilization sailing between the stars on giant spacecraft? This is the ultimate question of the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. We're searching for life beyond the Earth, but truly what we're searching for is our own future. We're asking the question, what is the future of an intelligent civilization? How long can they last? This is something that a pioneer in this field, Philip Morrison, called the archaeology of the future. Because of the finite speed of light, we're studying civilizations that as they were 1,000 or maybe 10,000 years ago. Our galaxy is 100,000 light years across. So if we detect a signal from a civilization that is on the other side of the galaxy, we're seeing that civilization as it was 100,000 years ago. But because our galaxy is so old, many billions of years, it's likely that that civilization we detect is much, much more advanced than we are and has been around much, much longer. So although we're looking at that civilization's past, we may be looking at our own civilization's future. Thank you.
That is cool, right? So Andrew Simeon is a very interesting person, also a very funny person. And if you have a chance to visit the Green Bank Observatory when you are in the States, that is where Frank Drake spent most of his career from the 50s all the way, if I'm correct, up to the 90s. So at the observatory, there's the Drake Lounge named after him, and the Drake equation is engraved on a plaque that is on the wall at the Drake Lounge. So right now, currently, South Africa is also involved with Breakthrough Listen and SETI. There is now talks that the Meerkat telescope will join the search, because that is one of the most sensitive instruments we also have on Earth. So for this chapter we're following the textbook, we're going to look at the nature of life, life in the universe, and intelligent life in the universe. This chapter is either unnecessary or vital. If you believe that astronomy is the study of the physical universe above the clouds, then you are done. The previous 19 chapters completed your study of astronomy. But if you believe that astronomy is the study not only of the physical universe, but also of your role as a living being in the evolution of the universe, then everything you have learned so far from this book has been in preparation for this final chapter. So in this chapter, we're going to answer a few important questions. 1, what is life? 2, how did life originate on Earth? 3, does life exist on other worlds? And lastly, can humans communicate with intelligent beings on other worlds? So before we start, what is your guys' opinion? Are there any other civilizations out there? Yes, I also personally think so. And the reason I say that is, if you just do the mathematics, so if you do the Drake equation and look at statistics, it is very unlikely that we are the only life out there. So according to mathematics and statistics, there has to be other life out there. And that brings us to an interesting question. Are there life? And either there are 1 or 2 answers about it. The one answer is we are alone, and that is terrifying. Or the other question is, other point is, there's a lot of other civilizations out there, but we are just too boring for them. So yes, there can be, looking at your comments, there can be other smaller organisms out there. One analogy that's probably overused is that you can't take a spoonful of the ocean and conclude there's no life in the ocean. Yes, that is exactly it. So before we start this list of the slides, there's one reminder I would like to ask. I know last year it caused quite a debate on it. I don't want to have the same debate this year again, but let's keep religion out of this lesson. I firmly believe there should be a separation, so you don't teach religion in a science class. That is okay with everyone? Awesome. If you want that kind of debate or talk, then we can set up another meeting for that or class for that. That will be extracurricular. So you won't get more than the beginnings of answers to those questions here, but often in science, asking a question is more important than getting an immediate answer. You have explored the universe from the phases of the moon to the Big Bang, from the origin of Earth to the death of the sun. Astronomy is meaningful, not just because it is about the universe, but because it is also about you. Now that you know astronomy, you see yourself and your world in a different way. Astronomy has changed you. As a living thing, you have been promoted from darkness. The atoms of carbon, oxygen, and other heavy elements that are necessary components of your body did not exist at the beginning of the universe, but were built up by successive generations of stars. The elements from which you are made are common everywhere in the observable universe. So it is possible that life began on other worlds. Future explorers may find alien species different from any life on Earth. It is possible some of those species have evolved to become intelligent. If so, perhaps those other civilizations will be detected from Earth. Your goal in this chapter is to try and understand truly intriguing puzzles, the origin and evolution of life on Earth, and what that tells you about whether there is life on other worlds. This new hybrid theory of study is called astrobiology. So what is life? Philosophers have struggled with the question for thousands of years, and it is not possible to answer it completely in one chapter or even one book. An attempt at the general definition of what living things do distinguishes them from non-living things. Might be, life is a process by which an organism extracts energy from the surroundings, maintains itself, and modifies the surroundings to foster its own survival and reproduction. One important observation is that all living things on Earth, no matter how apparently different, share certain characteristics in how they perform the process of life. The physical basis of life. The physical basis of life on Earth are carbon and water. So we asked a few people in the class, so a hint for the exam. Because of the way carbon atoms bond to each other and to other atoms, they can join into long, complex, stable chains that are capable, among many other feats, of storing and transmitting information. A large amount of information is necessary to control the activities and maintain the forms of living things. And in all living things on Earth, the chemical reactions making, breaking, and combining carbon change take place in liquid water within the cells of living organisms. So for your sci-fi fans, especially Star Trek, you've probably heard the term many times that we are carbon-based life forms. And in some Star Trek episodes, they say they've detected silicon-based life forms. And that is one other theory. So who says life elsewhere in the universe has to be made up of carbon? It could be made out of other building blocks. All living things on Earth are based on carbon chemistry and water. Even the long molecules that carry genetic information, DNA and RNA, have a framework defined by chains of carbon atoms. In image A, we can see Anastasia, a complex mammal, contains about 200 AU of DNA. Then in image B, each rod-like tobacco mosaic virus contains a single spiral strand of RNA about 0.01 millimeter long as its genetic material. How often do I watch Star Trek? So just to give you a clear indication, I have watched everything of Star Trek there is. Literally everything. All the movies, all the different series, everything. And the same with Star Wars, the same with Stargate. I'm a huge sci-fi fan. So while I have you on this topic, have you guys at least watched the core yet? Awesome. So please, the rest of you, please watch The Core. It's on Netflix. It's an awesome movie. Also, the note says, I think it's mid 2000s, so I'm correct, but it remains a good movie. He said, is it possible that life on other worlds could be based on silicon instead of carbon? Silicon is right below carbon in the periodic table, which means that it shares many of carbon's chemical properties. But life based on silicon rather than carbon seems unlikely because silicon chains are harder to assemble and disassemble than their carbon counterparts and can't be as lengthy. Is it possible that the chemistry of life on other worlds would take place in a setting other than water? Some alternatives, such as methanol alcohol, have been proposed, but carbon compounds dissolve especially easily in water. Also, water has exceptional properties such as high heat capacity, so the resistance to temperature change. Relative to other cosmically abundant substances that are liquid at the temperatures of planetary surfaces, is not just because Earth scientists are themselves made of carbon and water, that I think carbon and water are crucially important for the existence of life. Science fiction has proposed even stranger life forms based on, for example, electromagnetic fields and ionized gas, and none of these possibilities can be ruled out. Those hypothetical life forms make for fascinating speculation, but for now they can't be studied systematically in a way that life on Earth can. This chapter is concerned with the origin and evolution of life as it is on Earth, based on carbon and water, not because of lack of imagination, but because it is the only form of life about which we know anything. Even carbon and water-based life has its mysteries. What makes a lump of carbon-based molecules a living thing? An important part of the answer lies in the transmission of information from one molecule to another. Actions performed by living cells are carried out by molecules that are built within the cells. Cells must store recipes for making all those molecules as well as how and when to use them, and then somehow pass the recipes on to their offspring. So notice 3 important points and 7 new terms. The chemical recipes of life are stored in each cell as information on DNA. And DNA molecules that resemble a ladder with rungs composed of chemical bases. The recipe information is expressed by the sequence of the rungs, providing instructions to guide specific chemical reactions within the cell. The instructions stored in DNA are genetic information passed along to offspring. DNA instructions normally are expressed by being copied into a messenger molecule called RNA. The RNA molecule travels to a location in a cell where its message causes a sequence of molecular units called amino acids to be connected into large molecules called proteins. Proteins serve as the cell's basic structural molecule or as enzymes that control chemical reactions. The DNA molecule reproduces itself when a cell divides so that each new cell contains a copy of the original information. The sequence of DNA that composes one instruction is called a gene. Genes are organized into long coiled chains called chromosomes. The genes linked on one chromosome are normally passed on to offspring together. To produce viable offspring, the cell must be able to make copies of its DNA. Surprisingly, it is important for the continued existence of life that a copying process includes mistakes. Earth's environment changes continuously. To survive, species must change as their food supply, climate, or home terrain changes. If the information is stored and DNA could not change, then life eventually would become extinct. The process by which life adjusts itself to changing environments is called biological evolution. When an organism reproduces, its offspring receives a copy of its DNA. Sometimes external effects such as natural radiation alter the DNA during the parent organism's lifetime, and sometimes mistakes are made in the copying process, so that occasionally the copy is slightly different from the original. Offspring born with random alterations to the DNA are called mutants. Most mutations make no difference, but some mutations are fatal, killing the afflicted organisms before they can reproduce. In rare but vitally important cases, a mutation can actually help an organism survive. Can you guys think of mutations that happens in humans in the recent years? Yes, fingers, but think about it as well. There are now people born without a appendix because due to our diets we follow now, we have no use. Yes, we have no use for it now. So there are actually now a lot of people being born without a appendix. And if you look at teeth, there's also a few articles that's been released that, for example, people are now being born without wisdom tooth because a couple of 100 years ago, we used our wisdom teeth to break down plant-based material. But now our diets are so refined that we don't need it, so there's actually people now being born without wisdom tooth. And the biggest experiment on this, and I don't know if you guys have read a book or watched videos about it, is a year in space. There's been NASA took two astronauts that is identical twins. They sent one to the International Space Station for a year, and one was kept on Earth for a year. And after the year, they were examined to see how their DNA have changed. And yes, surprisingly, the results has been released, I think last year or the years before. There are some changes in the DNA. These changes produce variation among the members of the species. All of the squirrels in a park may look the same, but they carry a range of genetic variation. Some have slightly longer tails or faster growing claws. These variations make almost no difference until the environment changes. For example, if the environment becomes colder, a squirrel with a heavier coat or fur will on average survive longer and produce more offspring than its normal contemporaries. Likewise, the offspring that inherit this beneficial variation will also live longer and have more offspring of their own. In contrast, squirrels containing DNA recipes for thin fur coats will gradually decrease in number. These differences rates of survival and reproduction are examples of natural selection. Over time, the beneficial variations becomes more common, and the species can evolve until the entire population shares the trait. In this way, natural selection adapts species to their changing environments by selecting from a huge array of random variations that those would most benefit the survival of the species. Yes, that's also an interesting point, Mr. Kutsia. We might eventually have no need for hair, which is interesting. So you ask why? So go back a couple of 100,000 years, and to bring life forward is hair is used on a human body to protect the body and then also to keep the body warm and to keep the body cool. But as we are more now, we are wearing clothes. So if it's warm, we add a coat. If it's hotter, we remove a layer. And therefore, hair on a human body has become less and less and less because we have no use for it. So that is also a feature of natural selection and evolution. It is a common misconception that evolution is random, but that is not true. The underlying mechanisms creating variation within each species may be random, but natural selection is not random because progressive changes in species are directed by change in the environment. So, who is the father of natural selection? Yes, Charles Darwin. Life as we know it consists of just the single example of life on Earth. It is okay to think of all life on Earth as being just a single type of life because, as you learned in the previous section, all living things on Earth have the same physical basis, the same chemistry and the same genetic code's alphabet. How life began on Earth and then developed and evolved into its present variety has only solid information you have to work with when considering what might be possible on other worlds. Everything currently known about life on Earth indicates that the same natural process should lead to the origin of life on some fraction of other planets with liquid water. If there is life on other worlds, does it use DNA and RNA to carry the information for life processes? Or different molecules playing the same role, or some radically different scheme? There is no way to know unless another example of life is found on another world. If and when that day comes, even if the non-earthly life is a simple one-celled organism, the discovery will be one of the most important in the history of science. It will complete the journey of human understanding, begun in the Copernican revolution and progressive realizations that Earth is not unique. So, a bit of a philosophical question, but have you guys ever thought about it? Especially, let me highlight it. This point here, realization that Earth is not unique. What do you guys think will happen if, say, for example, tomorrow it's announced that life out there has been discovered? What will it do to the average person? Panic is correct. So you had two interesting points. Why would people freak out and why would some people celebrate and be happy? That is a very, very, very important point. Fear the unknown. So there's actually psychologists have done quite a lot of studies on this. I have a few friends that is psychologists. And for example, what do you guys think will happen to religion if we discover intelligent life on another planet? So yeah, people probably scared that aliens better than us might do to us who did animals. Yes, that is one thing. But one thing, as I said, what do we do to religion? That would be a problem. Because take, for example, Christianity. Christianity says we are made in God's image. But now we have found other life that's not in God's image. So what now? Yes, Mr. Kutsia, that is very true. Religion is very much Earth-centric. So on this note, in the past I have been invited to give a couple of public lectures at different places. One place that regularly gets me to do a public lecture is the Astronomical Society of South Africa. And every time I do a public lecture, depending on what the audience is and what topic they want us they do. So usually when something's happening in space, they ask me to do a talk on it. Then usually there is this one crazy religious person that interrupts me the entire time, saying what I'm talking about is bullshit, and it continues on forever. When was it? Before COVID. When was it? February last year. I gave a talk, and there was a public talk at Hartbeespoort Hydra Observatory. Usually on Saturdays we do public visits. Then, depending on students, I usually help out of that. Then we give a talk on what the observatory does. We give a talk on what the research the observatory does, and we give a tour of the observatory, and then afterwards have a picnic on the observatory grounds. Then there was a young family where the mother and father started shouting at me that the Big Bang is not real and I am crazy and it's against God's will. And eventually I just told them, this is the science. You don't have to believe what I say, but let me continue my lecture. Yes, exactly. So we said, what were they doing there? Exactly. So I said we're not going to talk about it, but just for interest's sake, I'm just going to get the feeling of everyone that's in this class tonight, who is religious and who is not. Okay, that is really interesting. Thank you guys for sharing. I know it was a bit of a interesting question. Thank you guys for sharing. So later after the class, I will just something interesting, because I like to look at facts and statistics. So I will show you a video of Neil deGrasse Tyson, where he has a long discussion on it, where there's a strong correlation between religion and education. So the statistics is based in the United States, but you can extrapolate that to around the world as well. So if you look at the United States, for people that have not finished high school, so dropped out of high school, all of them are religious. If you go to people that has finished high school, about 96% is religious. Then you start going to tertiary education. So when people get a bachelor's degree, then that number drops, but not by much, only by drops to about 74, 75%. But if you start getting into advanced programs such as honors degrees, master's degrees, PhDs, if you go to master's degrees, then that drops at only about 50% are religious. But then if you go to PhDs, only about 27 to 30% of PhDs are religious. And then if you start looking at the top of fields, so your elite scientists, only 7% of elite scientists are religious. And that's just a bone I'm throwing to you guys and something you can investigate on your own. So after the class, I will post you guys a link to that video. So now we'll discuss the origin of life on Earth. So it is obvious that the 4.5 billion chemical bases that make up human DNA did not come together in the right order just by chance. The key to understanding the origin of life lies in picturing the processes of evolution running backward. The complex interplay of environmental factors with the DNA of the generation of organisms drove some life forms to become more sophisticated over time until they become the unique and sophisticated creatures alive today. Imagining the process in reverse leads to the idea that life on Earth began with extremely simple life forms. Biologists hypothesized that the first living things would have been carbon chain molecules able to copy themselves. Of course, this is a scientific hypothesis for which you can seek evidence. What evidence exists regarding the origin of life on Earth? The oldest fossils are the remains of sea creatures, and this indicates that life began in the sea. Identifying the oldest fossils is not easy. However, ancient rocks from Western Australia that are about 3.5 billion years old contain features that biologists identify as stromatolites, fossilized remains of colonies of single-celled organisms. Fossils this old are difficult to recognize because the earliest living things did not contain easily preserved hard parts like bones or shells, and because the individual organisms were microscopic. Thus, the evidence through scare indicates the simple organisms lived in Earth's oceans less than 1.2 billion years after Earth formed. Stromatolite colonies of microorganisms are more complex than individual cells, so you can imagine they probably were earlier simpler organisms. The fossil stromatolite from Western Australia is more than 3 billion years old, presenting some of the oldest evidence of life on Earth. Stromatolites are formed layer upon layer by mats of bacteria living in shallow water, where they are covered repeatedly by sediments. Compare with the figure that opens this chapter an artist's conception of a scene on Earth at this time. So where did the simple organisms come from? An important experiment performed by Stanley Miller and Harold Urey in 1952 sought to recreate conditions on Earth before life began. The Miller-Urey experiment consisted of a sterile sealed glass container holding water, hydrogen, ammonia, and methane, thought to stimulate young Earth's atmosphere. An electric arc inside the apparatus made sparks to simulate the effects of lightning. So here we can see the Miller-Urey experiment circulated gas through water in the presence of an electric arc. This simulation of primitive conditions on Earth produced many complex organic molecules, including amino acids, the building blocks of proteins. In image B, Stanley Miller with the Miller-Urey apparatus. Miller and Urey let the experiment run for a week and then analyzed the material inside. They found that the interaction between the electric arc and the simulated atmosphere had produced many organic molecules from the raw material of the experiment, including such important building blocks of life as amino acids. So recall that an organic molecule is simply a molecule with carbon chain structure and need not be derived from a living thing. Organic doesn't necessarily imply biological. When the experiment was run against using different energy sources, such as a hot silica to represent molten lava exposed to the atmosphere, similar molecules were produced. Even a source of ultraviolet radiation, representing a small amount of UV light, was sufficient to produce complex organic molecules. Scientists are professionally skeptical about scientific findings, and they have re-evaluated the Miller-Urey experiment in light of new information. According to updated models of the formation of the solar system, so look back at chapter 15 and 16, Earth's early atmosphere probably consisted mostly of carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and water vapor instead of the mix of hydrogen, ammonia, methane, and water vapor assumed in the Miller-Urey experiment. When gases corresponding to the newer understanding of the early Earth atmosphere are processed in a Miller-Urey apparatus, lesser but still significant amounts of organic molecules are produced. The Miller-Urey experiment is important because it shows that complex organic molecules form naturally in a wide variety of circumstances. Lightning, sunlight, and hot lava are just some of the energy sources that can naturally rearrange simple common molecules into the complex molecules that make life possible. If you could travel back in time, you would expect to find Earth's early oceans filled with a rich mixture of organic compounds called the primordial soup. Many of these organic compounds would have been able to link up to form larger molecules. Amino acids, for example, can link together to form proteins by joining ends and releasing a water molecule. That reaction, however, does not proceed easily in a water solution. Scientists hypothesize that this step might have been more likely to happen on the shorelines or in sun-warmed tidal pools, where organic molecules from the primordial soup could have been concentrated by water evaporation. The production of large organic molecules may have been aided in such sedimentary environments by clay crystals acting as templates to hold organic subunits close together. So here we can see these amino acids can link together via the release of water molecule to form long carbon chain protein molecules. The amino acid is this hypothetical example is alanine, one of the simplest. In image B, when proteins cool in water, they often form microspheres, tiny globules with double-layered boundaries similar to cell membranes. Microspheres has been intermediate stage in evolution of life between complex but non-living molecules and living cells holding molecules reproducing genetic information. These complex organic molecules were still not living things. Even though some proteins may have contained hundreds of amino acids, they did not reproduce, but rather link and broke apart at random. Because some molecules are more stable than others and some bond together more easily than others, scientists hypothesized that the process of chemical evolution eventually concentrated the various smaller molecules into the most stable, larger forms. Eventually, according to the hypothesis, somewhere in the oceans, after sufficient time, a molecule formed that could copy itself. At that point, the natural selection and chemical evolution of molecules became the biological evolution of living things. An alternate theory for the origin of life holds that reproducing molecules may have arrived here from space. Radio astronomers have found a wide variety of organic molecules in the interstellar medium, and similar compounds have been found inside meteorites. The Miller-Urey experiment showed how easy it is for complex organic molecules to form naturally from simpler compounds. So it's not surprising to find them in space. Although speculation is fun, the hypothesis that life derived on Earth from space is presently more difficult to test than the hypothesis that Earth's life originated on Earth. Whether the first reproducing molecules formed here on Earth or in space, the important thing is that they could have formed by natural processes. Scientists know enough about those processes to feel confident about them, even though some of the steps remain unknown. The details of the origin of the first cells are unknown. The structure of cells may have arisen automatically because of the way molecules interact during chemical evolution. If a dry mixture of amino acids is heated, the acids form long, protein-like molecules that, when poured into water, collect to form microscopic spheres that behave in ways similar to cells. They have thin membrane surface, they absorb material from their surroundings, they grow in size, and they divide and bud just as cells do. However, They contain no large molecule that copies itself, so they are not alive. The first reproducing molecule to be surrounded by a protective membrane, resulting in a first cell, would have gained an important survival advantage over the reproducing molecules. Biologists inferred that the first cells must have been simple single-celled organisms, similar to modern bacteria. As you learned, with radioactive ages of 3.5 billion years and living stromatolites still from some places today. Stromatolites and other photosynthetic organisms would have begun adding oxygen, a product of photosynthesis, to Earth's atmosphere. An oxygen abundance of only 0.1% would have created an ozone square, protecting organisms from the sun's ultraviolet radiation and later allowing life to colonize the land. Over the course of eons, the natural processes of evolution gave rise to stunningly complex multicellular life forms with their own widely differing ways of life. It is a common misconception to imagine that life is too complex to have evolved from such simple beginnings. It is possible because small variations can accumulate, although that accumulation requires great amounts of time. There is little evidence of anything more than simple organisms on Earth until about 540 million years ago, almost 3 billion years after the earliest signs of life, at which time fossils indicate that life suddenly developed into a wide variety of complex forms, such as the trilobites. The sudden increase in complexity is known as the Cambrian explosion and marks the beginning of the Cambrian period. So in the image we can see trilobites make the first appearance in the Cambrian oceans. The smallest were almost microscopic and the largest were bigger than dinner plates. This example, about the size of your hand, lived 400 million years ago in an ocean floor that is now limestone deposit in Pennsylvania. Then in image B, in this artist's conception of the Cambrian sea bottom, so Anomalocaris, about human size, that's specialized organs including eyes, coordinated fins, gripping mandibles, and powerful tooth maw. So notice Opambinia at the center right of this long strout. If we represented the entire history of Earth on a scale diagram, the Cambrian explosion would be near the top of the column. So we're going to look at the following figure. The emergence of most animals familiar to you, including fishes, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals, would be crammed into the topmost part of the chart above the Cambrian explosion. So here is a chart of complex life has developed on Earth only recently. If the entire history of Earth were represented in a timeline, so left, you would have examined the end of the line closely to see details such as life leaving the oceans and dinosaurs appearing. The age of humans would still be only a thin line at the top of your diagram. If the history on Earth were a year-long videotape, humans would not appear until the last hours of December 31st. If you magnify that portion of the diagram as shown on the right side of the previous figure, you can get a better idea of when these events occurred in the history of life. Humanoid creatures have walked on Earth for about 4 million years. This is a long time by the standard of human lifetime, but it makes only a narrow red line at the top of the diagram. all of recorded history would be a microscopically thin line at the very top of the column. To understand just how thin that line is, imagine that the entire 4.6 billion year history of the Earth has been compressed into a year-long video, and you began watching this video on January 1. You would not see any signs of life until March or early April, and a slow evolution of the first simple forms would take the next 6 or 7 months. Suddenly in mid-November, you would see the trilobites and other complex organisms of the Cambrian explosion. You would see no life of any kind on land until November 28. But once life appeared, it would diversely quickly, and by December 12, you would see dinosaurs walking the continents. By the day after Christmas, they would be gone, and mammals and birds would be on the rise. If you watch closely, you might see the first humanoids form by late afternoon on New Year's Eve. And by late evening, you could see humans making the first stone tools. The Stone Age would last until 1159, after which the first towns and then cities would appear. Suddenly things would begin to happen at lightning speed. Babylonian would flourish, the pyramids would rise, and Troy would fall. The Christian era would begin 14 seconds before the new year. Rome will fall, the Middle Ages and a Renaissance would flicker past. The American and French revolutions would occur 1.5 seconds before the end of the video. By imagining the history of Earth as a year-long video, you have gained some perspective on the rise of life. Tremendous amount of time were needed for the first simple living things to evolve in the oceans. As life became more complex, new forms arose more and more quickly as the hardest problems. How to reproduce, how to take energy efficiently from the environment, how to move around was solved of biological evolution. The easier problems, how to eat, where to live, and how to raise young, were managed in different ways by different organisms, leading to the diversity that is seen today. Intelligence, that property that appears to set humans apart from other animals, may be a unique solution to the evolutionary problem posed to humanity's ancient ancestors. A smart animal is better able to escape predators, catch its prey, and feed and shelter itself and its offspring. So under certain conditions, evolution is likely to naturally select for the intelligence. So this brings me to an interesting point. I don't know if you guys have realized it, but the biological difference between us and chimps is not much. What do you think is the biological difference between us and chimps percentage-wise? How much do our DNA differ? So yes, it's 1%. So we differ by 1%. And what do you think is the intelligent difference between us and chimps? We are much more intelligent than chimps. Do you all agree? So there's an interesting hypothesis going around saying that what if other intelligent life exists, but our DNA and their DNA differs by 1%, meaning we are to them as chimps are to us. So where the smartest of our people do quantum mechanics and calculus and learn years to master the art of calculus, where if we differ in 1%, as we learn from a young age to do our ABCs, the other intelligent life would be learning to do calculus as their ABCs. And that is just another food for thought, another thought experiment. Could there be carbon-based life elsewhere in our solar system? As you learned earlier, liquid water seems to be a requirement for carbon-based life. necessary both as the medium for vital chemical reactions and to transport nutrients and wastes. It is not surprising that life developed on Earth's oceans and stayed there for billions of years before it was able to colonize the land. It is difficult to pin down a range of environments and be sure that life based on carbon and water cannot exist outside those conditions. So long as there is even occasionally some liquid water present. Life has been found on Earth in places previously judged inhospitable, such as the bottoms of ice-covered lakes in Antarctica, far underground inside solid rock, and in pools of nearly boiling hot water. An organism that can survive and even thrive in extreme environment is called an extremophile. Scientists searching for life in other worlds must keep in mind Earth's extremophiles and the harsh conditions in which they thrive. Colonies of thermophilic, so the meaning heat-loving single-celled organisms, thrive around the edge of Yellowstone National Park's ground prismatic spring at temperatures up to 72 degrees Celsius, producing the green pigments. The blue water in the center of the pool is too hot even for thermophiles. Yes, Mr. Groenewald, exactly like that. Many worlds in the solar system can be eliminated immediately as hosts for water-based life because liquid water is not possible there. The Moon and Mercury are airless, and water would boil away into space immediately. Venus has traces of water vapor in its atmosphere, but it's too hot for liquid water to survive on the surface. The Jovian planets have deep atmospheres, and at a certain altitude it is likely that water condenses into liquid droplets. However, it seems unlikely that life could have originated there. Jovian planets do not have solid surfaces, so isolated water droplets cannot mingle to mimic the original oceans on Earth, where organic molecules grew and interacted. Additionally, powerful downdraft currents in the atmospheres of the giant planets would quickly carry any reproducing molecules that did from there into inhospitably hot lower regions. As you learn in Chapter 8 in Section 2, at least one of the Jovian satellites could potentially support life. Jupiter's moon Europa appears to have a liquid water ocean below its icy crust, and minerals dissolved in water could provide a source of raw material for chemical evolution. Europa's ocean is kept liquid now by tidal heating. There are evidently also liquid zones inside Ganymede, Callisto, and Saturn's moon Enceladus that can change as the moons interact gravitationally with each other and their orbits change. All of them may have been frozen solid at other times in their histories, which would probably have destroyed any living organism that had developed there. Saturn's moon's Titan is rich in organic molecules. You learn in Chapter 18, Section 3, that sunlight converts the methane in Titan's atmosphere into organic smog particles that settle to the surface. The chemistry of life that could have evolved from those molecules and survived in Titan's lakes of methane is unknown. It is fascinating to consider possibilities, but Titan's extremely low temperature, so this is a typo, looks like when I copy this from my other slides, this is wrong, this should be a negative, I will fix that in the slides, would make chemical reactions so slow that life processes seem unlikely. Water containing organic molecules have been observed venting from the south polar region of Saturn's moon Enceladus. It is possible that life could exist in the water under Enceladus crust, but the moon is quite small and its tidal heating might operate only occasionally. Enceladus might not have had plentiful liquid water for the extended time necessary for the rise of life. Aside from Earth, Mars is most likely place for life to exist in the solar system, because as in Chapter 17, Section 3, there is a great deal of evidence that liquid water once flowed on its surface. Even so, results from searches for signs of life on Mars are not encouraging. the robotic spacecraft Viking 1 and Viking 2 landed on Mars in 1976 and tested soil samples for living organisms. Some of the tests had puzzling, semi-positive results that scientists hypothesized were caused by non-biological chemical reactions in the soil. No evidence clearly indicates that presence of life or even of organic molecules in the Martian soil. Life may have required special circumstances to start on Earth, but once it started, biological evolution allowed life to spread across Earth and adapt to a wide range of conditions. Eventually, all niches, even extreme environments, became occupied. Scientists generally think this means that if life begins on a planet, even if the environment of the planet later becomes generally inhospitable, as seems to have happened on Mars, some life could continue to survive. If life still exists on Mars, it may be hidden below ground where there may be liquid water and where UV radiation from the sun cannot penetrate. There was a splash of news stories in the 1990s regarding supposed chemical and physical traces of life on Mars discovered inside a Martian meteorite found in Antarctica. Scientists were excited by the announcement, but they employed professional skepticism and immediately began testing the evidence. The results suggest that a unusual chemical signature in the rock may have formed by processes that did not involve life. Tiny features in a rock that were originally thought to be fossils of ancient Martian microorganisms could possibly be non-biological minerals formations instead. So we can see here about the size of a compact car. Viking lander model sits in a simulated Martian environment on Earth. A claw for grabbing rock and soil samples in the foreground at the end of the black arm. In 1976, the two Viking landers made measurements possibly indicating some sort of microbial activity on the Martian dirt. Then in image B, meteorite ALH is one of a dozen meteorites known to have originated on Mars. The name means the meteorite was the first found in 1984 near Antarctic's Allen Hills. In image C, a group of researchers claimed that ALH contained chemical and physical traces of ancient life on Mars, including what appears to be fossils of microscopic organisms. That evidence has not been confirmed and the claims continues to be tested and debated. In 2009, astronomers observing the Martian atmosphere announced detection of faint traces of methane, a substance made abundantly by living things on Earth. Methane would be destroyed in the Martian environment by solar UV radiation and chemical reactions. So the methane that is present must have been produced recently. Also in 2014, the Curiosity rover detected a brief increase in methane abundance in its location. There are also geological processes that can emit methane, but those processes are connected to volcanism. A map of Martian atmospheric methane concentrations would show methane primarily in locations that are not volcanic provinces. It seems possible that organisms living in a Martian soil are making methane right now. This evidence regarding potential life on Mars remains highly controversial. Conclusive evidence of life on Mars may have to wait until a geologist from Earth looking for fossils can scramble down dry Martian stream beds and crack open rocks, or drill into the soil seeking signs of metabolizing microorganisms. There is presently no compelling evidence for the existence of life in the solar system other than on Earth. Now your search will take you to the distant planetary systems. Could life exist in other planetary systems? You already know that there are many different kinds of stars, and that many of these stars have planetary systems. As a first step toward answering the question, you can try to identify the kinds of stars that seem most likely to have stable planetary systems where life could evolve. If a planet is to be a suitable home for living things, there must be a suitable orbit around its sun. That is easy in a planetary system like our own, but planets' orbits in binary star systems would be unstable unless their component stars are very close together or very far apart. Astronomers can calculate that in binary systems with stars separated by intermediate distances of a few AU, the planet should eventually be swallowed up by one of the stars or ejected from the system. Half of the stars in a galaxy are members of binary system. Many of them are unlikely to support life on planets. Moreover, just because a star is single does not necessarily make it a good candidate for sustaining life. Earth required perhaps as much as 1 billion years to produce the first cells and 4.6 billion years for intelligence to emerge. Massive stars that shine for only a few million years do not meet this criterion. If the time of development of life on Earth is typical, then stars more massive and luminous than about spectral type F5 last too short a time for complex life to develop. Main sequence type of G, K, and M are the best candidates in terms of stellar lifetime. The temperature of a planet is also important, and that depends on the type of star it orbits and the distance from the star. Astronomers have defined a habitable zone, so I like to call it the Goldilocks zone, you'd see the three bears. It's not too cold, not too hot, just warm, but you can use habitable zone as well. Around a star as a region within which planets that orbit there have temperatures permitting the existence of liquid water. The Sun's habitable zone extends from near the orbit of Venus to the orbit of Mars, with Earth right in the middle. A low luminosity star has a small and narrow habitable zone, whereas high luminosity stars has a large and wide one. Stable planets inside habitable zones of long-lived stars are the places where life seems most likely, but given the tendency and resilience of Earth's life forms, there might be other seemingly inhospitable places in the universe where life exists. You should also note that 3 of the environments considered as possible havens for life, Europa, Titan, and Enceladus, are in the outer solar system far outside the Sun's conventionally defined habitable zone. So currently there are missions planned for landers to go to Europa, Titan, and Enceladus and to drill into their surfaces to try and get to the water oceans, especially those on Europa, to see if they can't be found any microbes or any other living things inside of water. Could intelligent life arise on other worlds? To try to answer this question, you can estimate the changes of any type of life arising on other worlds. Then assess the likelihood of that developing intelligence. If other civilizations exist, it is possible humans eventually may be able to communicate with them. Nature puts restrictions on the pace of such conversations. But the main problem lies in the unknown life expectancy of civilizations. The distance between the stars are almost beyond comprehension. The fastest human device ever launched, the New Horizons probe, which took 9 years to reach Pluto and then sailed on into the Kuiper Belt, will take about 90,000 years to travel the distance to the nearest star, 4 light years. The obvious way to overcome these huge distances is with tremendously fast spaceships, but even the closest stars are many light years away. Nothing can exceed the speed of light, and accelerating a spaceship close to the speed of light takes huge amounts of energy. Even if you were to travel slower than light, your rocket will still require massive amounts of fuel. If you want to pilot a spaceship with a mass of 100 tons, about the size of a fancy yacht, to the nearest star, and you traveled at half the speed of light, so as to arrive in 8 years, the trip would require 400 times as much energy as the entire United States consumes in 1 year. Imagine how much fuel the Starship Enterprise would need. These limitations not only make it difficult for humans to leave the solar system, but they would also make it difficult for aliens to visit Earth. Reputable scientists have studied unidentified flying objects, UFOs, and have never found any evidence that Earth is being visited or has ever been visited by aliens. Humans are unlikely ever to meet aliens face to face. However, communication by electromagnetic signals across interstellar distances takes relatively little energy. Nature put restrictions on travel through space, and it also restricts the possibility of communicating with distant civilizations by radio. One restriction is based on simple physics. Radio signals are electromagnetic waves that travel at the speed of light. Due to the distances between the stars, the speed of radio waves would severely limit humanity's ability to carry on normal conversations with distant civilizations. Decades could elapse between asking a question and getting an answer. So rather than try to begin a conversation, one group of astronomers decided in 1974 to broadcast a message of greeting toward the globular cluster M13, 26,000 light years away, using the Arecibo radio telescope. When a signal arrives 26,000 years in the future, alien astronomers may be able to understand it because the message is anti-coded, meaning that it's intended to be decoded easily by beings about whom we know nothing except that they build radio telescopes. The message is a string of 1,679 pulses and gaps. Pulses represent ones and gaps represent zeros. The string can be arranged in 2 dimensions and only 2 possible ways, as 23 rows of 73 or 73 rows of 23. The second arrangement forms a picture containing information about life on Earth. Yes, Mr. Groenewald, the Arecibo message. So here we can see the anti-coded message is designed for easy decoding. Here a string of 35 radio pulses representing as ones and zeros can be arranged in only 2 ways, as 5 rows of 7 or 7 rows of 5. The second way reproduces a friendly message. Then in image B, the Arecibo message describes life on Earth. Color added for clarity. Binary numbers give the height of the human figure, so 1110, and the diameter of the telescope dish. In units of the wavelength of the signal, it's 12.3 centimeters. What are the chances that a signal like the Arecibo message would be heard across interstellar distances? Surprisingly, a radio dish the size of Arecibo telescope located anywhere in the Milky Way galaxy would detect the output from our Arecibo. The human race's modest technical capabilities already can put us into cosmic chat rooms. Although the 1974 Arecibo beacon was the only powerful signal sent purposefully from Earth to other star systems, Earth is sending out many other forms of signals, more or less accidentally. Shortwave radio signals, including TV and FM, has been leaking into space for at least 16 years or so. Every civilization within 60 light years could already have detected Earth's civilization. That works both ways. Alien signals, whether intentional messages of friendship or the blather of the equivalent to daytime TV, could be arriving at Earth now. Groups of astronomers from several countries are pointing radio telescopes at the most likely stars and listening for alien civilizations. Which channels should astronomers monitor? Signals with wavelengths larger than 30 centimeters would get lost in the background noise of our Milky Way galaxy, while wavelengths shorter than 1 centimeter are mostly absorbed in Earth's atmosphere. Between those wavelengths is a radio window that is open for communication. Even this restricted window contains millions of possible radio frequency bands and is too wide to monitor easily. But astronomers may have thought of a way to narrow the search. Within this broad radio window lie the 21 centimeter spectral line of neutral hydrogen and an 18 centimeter line of hydroxyl. The interval between those lines has low background interference and is named a waterhole because H plus OH yields water. Any civilization sophisticated enough to do radio astronomy would know of these lines and might appreciate their significance in the same way as do Earthlings. Radio noise from various astronomical sources and Earth's atmospheric opacity makes it difficult to detect distant signals at wavelengths longer than 30 centimeters or shorter than 1 centimeter. In this range, wavelengths of radio emission lines from hydrogen atoms and from hydroxyl molecules mark a small wavelength range named a waterhole, may be likely channel for interstellar communication. So here we can see our, let me get the background radiation. Here is quantum mechanical noise, noise from Earth's atmosphere, noise from the Milky Way. So right here is the water. So question, but what makes us so confident that the interpretation of radio waves will be similar to ours? Because no matter where we are in the universe, the physics remain the same. The math remains the same. So everything will remain the same. So if they have understanding of physics, they will have the same understanding as our understanding of physics. A number of searches for extraterrestrial radio signals have been made, and some are now underway. This field of study is known as SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and it has generated heated debate among astronomers, philosophers, theologians, and politicians. You can imagine that a discovery of real alien intelligence would cause a huge change in humanity's worldview. Akin to Galileo's discovery that the moons of Jupiter do not go around the Earth. Congress funded a NASA SETI search for a short time, but ended support in the early 1990s. In fact, the annual cost of a major search is only about as much as a single Air Force helicopter. But much of the reluctance to fund searches stems from issues other than costs. Segments of the population, including some members of Congress, consider the idea of extraterrestrial beings as so outlandish that continued public funding for the search became impossible. In spite of the controversy, the search continues. The NASA SETI project, cancelled by Congress, were renamed Project Phoenix and completed using private funds. The SETI Institute, founded in 1984, managed Project Phoenix plus several other important searches, and is currently building a new radio telescope array in Northern California in collaboration with the University of California, Berkeley. That was partly funded by Paul Allen. You guys know who Paul Allen is? Paul Allen is one of the co-founders of Microsoft. There is even a way for you to help with searches. The Berkeley SETI team know that they are separate from the SETI Institute with the support of the Planetary Society. Do you guys know what the Planetary Society is? So the Planetary Society is a space research society that's not controlled by any government or specific institute. It was created by Carl Sagan, and it is funded by the public. So they conduct their research by counting on contributions and donations from the public. They have launched 2 solar sailors that they have tested, and they also help with SETI. So the current chair of the Planetary Society is Bill Nye, the science guy. So the support of the Planetary Society has recruited about 4 million owners of personal computers that are connected to the internet. You can download a screensaver that searches data from the Arecibo radio telescope for signals whenever you're not using the computer. So this is cool. So if you want to use SETI at home, you can download it. Then whenever you're not using your computer, then it processes information in the background. So this is one way to solve the big data problem, and you have a supercomputer on your hands. The search continues, but radio astronomers struggle to hear anything against the worsening babble of radio noise from human civilization. Wider and wider sections of the electromagnetic spectrum are being used for earthly communications. And this, combined with the stray electromagnetic radiation from electronic devices, including everything from computers to refrigerators, make hearing faint radio signals difficult. It would be ironic if humans fail to detect faint radio signals from another world because of our own world has become too noisy. One alternate search strategy is to look for rapid flashes of laser light at optical or near-infrared wavelengths, such as extraterrestrial signals. If they exist, would have the advantage of being easily distinguished from natural light sources, but a disadvantage of being blocked by interstellar dust. Ultimately, the chance of success for any of these searches depends on the number of inhabited worlds in the galaxy. Yes, you are correct, Mr. Groenewald. The Nobel Prize can only be shared by 3 individuals. So given enough time, the searchers will find other worlds with civilizations, assuming that there are at least a few out there. If intelligence is common, scientists should find signals relatively soon, within the next few decades. But if intelligence is rare, it might take much longer. Simple arithmetic can give you an estimate of the number of technological civilizations in the Milky Way galaxy with which you might communicate. The formula proposed for discussions about NC, so the number of cumulative civilizations, is named the Drake equation after the radio astronomer Frank Drake, a pioneer in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. The version of the Drake equation presented here is modified slightly from its original form. So here we can see N is the number of stars in our galaxy. Fp represents the fraction of stars that have planets. The factor NHZ is the average number of habitable planets in each planetary system. For the sake of the present discussion, the number of planets per system possessing substantial amounts of liquid water. The conventional habitable zone in our system contains Earth's orbit and arguably also Venus and Mars. The Kepler mission has already revealed several Earth-sized planets orbiting the habitable zones around other stars. Moreover, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto and Enceladus show that liquid water can exist due to tidal heating outside the conventional habitable zone. This NHZ may be larger than had been originally thought. In fact, the FL is the fraction of suitable planets on which life begins. And FL is the fraction of those planets that involves FI is intelligent life. So a hint for the exam: know the Drake equation, what each symbol means, and explain it. Notice that the Drake equation is, in a sense, based on an extension of the idea put forth by Copernicus that Earth is not unique. You can put in numbers for various factors that represent low probabilities or high probabilities. But either way, the implicit assumptions of the equation is that Earth, life on Earth, and the human species that desires to make contact with other intelligence in the universe are single examples of larger sets of such things. The 6 factors on the right-hand side of the Drake equation can be roughly estimated, with decreasing certainty as you proceed from left to right. The final factor is extremely uncertain. The factor Fs, the fraction of a star's life during which an intelligent species is commutative. If a society survives at a technological level of only 100 years, the chances of communicating with it is small. If most civilizations last only a short time, there may be none capable of transmitting during the cosmically short interval when Earthlings are capable of building radio telescopes to listen for them. On the other hand, a society that stabilizes and remains technologically capable for a long time is much more likely to be detectable. For parent stars with lifespans up to 10 billion years, Fs might conventionally range from 10 to the power minus 8 if such societies are extremely short-lived, to 10 to the power minus 3 if such societies normally survive for 10 million years. So table 21 summarizes what many scientists consider a reasonable range of values for Fs and other worlds. If the optimistic estimates are true, there could be a cumulative civilization within a few tens of light years from Earth. On the other hand, if the pessimistic estimates are true, Earth may be the only planet that is capable of communication within thousands of the nearest galaxies. Yes, Mr. Visage.
So I just wanted to ask about the number of planets per star that orbit in the habitable zone. Is this talking about, for instance, how many how many planets around that star can sort of maintain life with all this, like what we've been talking about with the water, etc.
So yes, the habitable zone depends on the size and luminosity of that world. So if the star has a low luminosity, that means the habitable band will be smaller, and meaning less. This likelihood of planets being in the habitable band is less. If the luminosity is higher, it means the habitable zone around the star will be larger and more planets can reside within that habitable zone.
Oh, so basically, the more light, the more possibility of extraterrestrial life.
Yes, so let me get a whiteboard out. So what that actually means is if we have a star of a certain size and certain luminosity, its habitable band will be a certain size. And if there's planets that could support life, it will be somewhere inside this band. But if we have for example, a bit bigger star with a bit higher luminosity, it means that that habitable band can be much bigger, meaning that the possibility of more planets being in this band is a lot higher, and therefore um, there could be more life in that specific system, or more planets that could have life in that specific system.
Oh, okay. So this is sort of like in statistics where they talk about the central limit theorem in such a sense.
Yes, so that is correct. So basically, it comes down to the statistics.
So then Drake's equation is mainly focused on statistics more than science per se.
Yes. So yeah, this base is based on statistics.
And just one last thing that I wanted to ask. So, because if we look at stars far away from us, we're looking into the past and to the future, or mainly the past. Um, would we ever be able to communicate with extraterrestrial life if, let's say, for instance, we were communicating with civilizations from millions of years ago?
That is an interesting question. So there is a couple of theories going around it. So right now, currently, the fastest way of communication is electromagnetic waves, and that travels at the speed of light, and that is limited by the speed of light. But if you look at mathematics, then you have different subspaces. So one of the theories is, and that's a theory that's the communication system in Star Trek, for example, makes use of it, what I call subspace communication. So it is a different dimension where there's no limit on the speed of light, where communication can happen in real time, but that is purely now a theory exercise.
I don't know much about string theory, but if I remember correctly, it's something where you take like a piece of paper and you fold it slightly, and or you try and travel objects through space-time by folding a piece of paper. Would it be possible to maybe transfer signals through maybe like string theory?
So I think there's a little bit of confusion. So what you describe a piece of paper, that is a example of a wormhole. So yes, if we can discover a wormhole or create a wormhole, then yes, that's a possibility. But what string theory is, if we go to subatomic particles, so we know we have neutrons, protons, electrons, we can divide that into smaller particles called quarks. The quarks we can divide into smaller particles, but there's a theory that says everything, all the smallest particles, are made up of strings that is entwined in one another. So to make string theory work, you had have to add a few other dimensions for the math to come alive. But yes, that is where string theory began and what string theory is about. No problems. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was our lecture on extraterrestrial life. So before we end the lecture, I want to show you one last video of Dr. Dan Wertheimer, also a guy I'm quite in contact with regularly. He's the chief principal scientist of SETI. Also a wonderful person and also a genius. So let me show you the video.
Thanks very much. So I want to talk to you about this question, are we alone? Is anybody out there? It's a question that humans have been asking for a few 100,000 years, and maybe in this century we have a chance of answering the question. The field is called SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and there have been lots of ideas over the years about how we might get in touch with ET. Some of the early ideas, Gauss, the mathematician, suggested that we get in touch with ET by making large geometric structures on the planet, a right triangle, maybe 3, 4, 5 miles on a side, a big square of dirt, a big square of water, and a big square of wheat. And ET would look down and see that we knew about the Pythagorean theorem, and maybe they would get in touch. It was a great idea at the time. Unfortunately, it was not funded. And then Charles Crow suggested that we get in touch with the Martians by, I'm sorry. He suggested we get in touch with ET by digging a circular ditch 20 miles across and fill the ditch with kerosene and then use this match, not to scale, to make a bright circle of light, a bright circle of fire. And then ET again would look down and see this bright circle, and maybe they would get in touch. And I think you might be able to guess what happened with this. Met with a similar fate. And then Charles Crow suggested we get in touch with the Martians by using large mirrors to reflect the sunlight to the Martians, actually several mirrors, one where he lived in Paris and the others to outline the shape of the Big Dipper. And I think you guess what happened here. The first funded project in SETI was to send pornography into space. So this is a plaque. You might have seen it on the Pioneer 10 spacecraft that left the Earth in the early 70s. And these are very controversial. Originally, they were holding hands, and NASA decided that that was not a good idea because ET, if they found this plaque, they would think it was one creature, so they don't hold hands right now. And here's the solar system and the sun and Mercury, Venus, and here is Earth, and you can see the spacecraft leaving the Earth, traveling at about 100,000 miles an hour, going out to the stars. And then these are directions. This is a map, so that if ET wants to know where we live and they want to come and eat us, they'll know exactly where we live. So that was the first funded project. One of the big questions in SETI is, are there good planets out there going around other stars? And if you had asked me 20 years ago, are there planets going on other stars? I would have said, I don't know. Nobody knew at that 20 years ago. But that has all changed, largely due to work here at San Francisco State University. They pioneered how to find these little dinky planets. Planets are hard to find because they're little, they're very tiny. 1 million Earths could fit inside the sun. And they're right next to this really bright thing. So they're really hard to find. And that work was pioneered here, and it led to this thing called Kepler, which the way that Kepler found planets was to look and see if a planet goes in front of a star. I don't know if you see this little black dot here, but that is a planet going in front of a star. And you can't actually see the planet from the Kepler spacecraft, but what you can see is that the light dims down a little bit. When the planet gets in front, the light dims down. If you see a star that dims down a little bit, say, what's going on? Well, that betrays the presence of the planet. And if it goes around periodically, every few months or every year or whatever, then you really know that you found a planet. And Kepler found thousands of planets. And here's an example of some of the planets going around their stars. And you can see that a lot of the planets are in multi-planet systems, 6, 7, 8 planets. And now we know that there are more planets than there are stars in the Milky Way galaxy. There are about 1 trillion planets in our Milky Way galaxy. And if you're not happy with the trillion planets, there are about 100 billion other galaxies besides the Milky Way galaxy that we live in. A lot of places, and a lot of those planets are little dinky things like Earth, little rocky planets, and we think a lot of them have liquid water. We call them Goldilocks planets. If the planet is too far from the star, it's going to be cold. If it's too close, it's going to be too hot. If it's at the right distance, it's a Goldilocks planet. Okay, we have a lot of planets. Well, what about life? How often does life get started? We don't really know. We don't understand all the details of how the chemistry turns into self-replicating molecules. But we are optimistic about primitive life. And the reason we're optimistic is because life got started on Earth very early. The oldest rocks you can find have microfossils. As soon as the Earth cooled down, it looked like life popped up. So even though we don't understand the details, because it happened quickly here on Earth, we think it's going to happen quickly on other planets as well. And so the universe is probably teeming with simple life. We don't know how often it evolves to become intelligent and we could communicate, but it's probably teeming with simple life. There may even be life in our own solar system. So this is a moon going around Jupiter called Europa. This is a cutaway view. And you can see that it has a liquid ocean. This blue stuff is liquid water. It's heated by tidal forces. And maybe there's something swimming around down there in the ocean. The problem is we can't tell because this white stuff is ice. It's covered with ice. Even though it's warm water, it's covered with ice. It's about 30 miles thick of ice. And we don't know how to get through the ice. So when I give talks at elementary schools, I ask the kids, how are we going to get through the ice? And I tell them we don't really know. NASA doesn't know how to do it. And the boys have a different answer than the girls. The boys say machine guns or bombs. They're kind of like Donald Trump. And the girls are usually a little more clever and not as violent. They want to melt their way through the ice, like use mirrors to focus the sun's rays and heat the ice. Anyway, it's interesting at elementary school already. There's a kind of separation there, unfortunately. Okay, so there's a lot of other moons, and even in our own solar system, we might find primitive life. What about how are we going to find intelligent life? So one of the ideas is that Earthlings are sending off a lot of radio and television out into space. And we've been transmitting television signals now for about 70 years. The early shows, like I Love Lucy and Ed Sullivan, have been traveling out. Now they're 70 light years out. They've gone past about 10,000 stars. And the nearby stars have seen The Simpsons. So they haven't seen Donald Trump yet. So this is a plot of television power leaving the Earth, 1940, 1950, 1960. And you can see we're getting brighter and brighter. And we're brighter than the sun now at television frequencies. So if we are transmitting messages that go out traveling at the speed of light, much faster than our rockets, maybe ET does that too. And we've even sent messages intentionally. This was a message transmitted in the 70s. We think that pictures are a good way to communicate. They're not going to speak English or Portuguese, but we think pictures, images they're going to be able to perceive their environment or 2 or 3 dimensions. And so this was a picture with a person and a DNA molecule and the solar system. Maybe you can see the sun and Mercury, Venus, and the Earth tipped toward the person, a radio telescope. Anyway, that is an example of how you might start up a conversation. Math is another good way. Prime numbers, 2 + 2 = 4, stuff like that. Okay, so we are sending off radio signals out into space. We want to find out if ET is doing that too, if they have television or radar or radio. So in order to do that, we need a big radio antenna. We call them a radio telescope. This is a one that we started using in the 70s. It's 85 feet across. And while we were using this telescope to look for ET, this is what happened to it. This is the dish. It used to be up here on the pedestal. So we moved to a different telescope. We moved to this telescope. This is another radio telescope in West Virginia. This is 300 feet across, one of the world's largest telescopes. And while we were using this telescope to look for radio signals from ET, this is what happened to that telescope. And you might ask, why did that happen to Dan? Why did both telescopes that he was using to look for ET get destroyed? Well, the answer, according to the World Weekly News, is that the aliens did not want to be discovered. And they zapped the telescope, zapped by hostile space aliens. So we're testing this idea, the ZAP idea, at this telescope. This is the world's largest radio telescope. It's in Puerto Rico. It's 1,000 feet across. It's called the Arecibo Telescope. It holds 10 billion bowls of cornflakes, although we haven't actually tried that yet. So far, it has not been zapped by hostile space alien, although it's a little harder to zap. You might have seen it in the James Bond movie GoldenEye, although in GoldenEye they say it's in Cuba, which is not, and it comes out of the water, which it doesn't. But it was also in the movie Contact, which was a book written by Carl Sagan, who used to work in our group. Anyway, so we collect a huge amount of data at this telescope, petabytes, many petabytes of data. And the problem we have is that it's so much data, we can't analyze it all ourselves with the computers that we have, even the supercomputer that we have at Berkeley. So we are asking volunteers all around the world to help us. If you have a computer, a laptop, or a desktop, or an Android phone, you can help us analyze the data. And the way it works is that we store the data, and then we break it up into little pieces. So if you want to help us analyze the data, you run a little screensaver program called the SETI at Home Screensaver Program. You download this free program. If you want to find it and help us look for ET, Google SETI, S-E-T-I, and you'll find SETI at Home, and you can download this program. And you can volunteer to help us analyze the data. And the way it works is that everybody gets a different part of the sky. So you'll get one part of the sky, you'll get a different piece of the data. And then when you go out for a cup of coffee, the screensaver pops up on your computer, just like but instead of just putting pretty pictures of goldfish swimming around on your screen, it's actually going through the data that you've been assigned, looking for all the different frequencies and signal types. And when it's done, it might take a few days, it'll send the results, whatever you find, whatever your screensaver finds, any strong signals it finds, it sends the results back to our computer at Berkeley. And your name is attached to that data. So if you find ET, you get the Nobel Prize. Although it's actually not mine to decide, but you might get it. This is a little animation of the data that's going out from Berkeley to all the volunteers around the world. The yellow dots are the data that we're sending out. The blue dots are when they're finished analyzing the data, then they send back the results. And they form one of the biggest supercomputers on the planet. There are about 8 million people who are helping us out. They're spread out in 226 countries. And it's made the search incredibly sensitive and much more powerful beyond our wildest dreams. And we're very grateful to the SETI Home volunteers. And I hope if you're not running SETI Home, you'll go and download this thing and help us look for ET. The software that we developed, the SETI software, is open source software. And it's being now used by a lot of different science projects. So you can, at home now, instead of just doing SETI, you can look for malaria drugs and cancer drugs and HIV drugs. This is a program you can run to search for black holes. This is global warming, climate prediction. This is looking at pulsars and gravitational waves. This is protein. And you can allocate how you want your computers to be used. You can say, I want 20% of my spare computing cycles to go for SETI and 30% for malaria research. And you can participate in your favorite projects. So this is a brand new thing that we're doing this year. We ran into a billionaire and the Breakthrough Prize Foundation, and they gave us a lot of money to do a huge SETI program, and we're just starting with 3 telescopes. In fact, one of the telescopes that we're using, we're just launching today. So we started using this thing at Lick Observatory looking for laser signals. Lick Observatory, some of you might know, is near San Jose up east on Mount Hamilton, and we're looking for laser signals there. And then we're using a telescope, the one that collapsed in West Virginia, they built a new one, and we're using this one in West Virginia. And then the thing that we're launching today that we're really excited about is a telescope in Australia called the Parkes Telescope. The reason we're all excited about this thing that we're starting today is that if ET's lurking in the south, these other telescopes that we've been using are in the north. So if it's one of the southern stars, we would have missed them. This is very little work has been done in Australia and looking at the southern stars. So we're really excited about that. We're going to look at 1 million stars and 1,000 galaxies. It's a big, new, powerful project we're really excited about. Another thing that we're excited about is a brand new telescope that's being built in China. This is going to be even bigger than the one in Puerto Rico. It's 500 meters across, and you can see it's made out of little panels. And now it's all finished, and they're just starting to use it, and we're hoping to work with the Chinese to do SETI. This is kind of longer term, 10 or 20 years away. We're learning how to build, instead of one big dish, build a telescope out of lots of little dishes, maybe thousands of little dishes. And this is being built in South Africa and Australia. A lot of countries are getting together. We think that'll be a spectacular way to look for very faint signals, making a giant telescope out of lots of little telescopes. The other thing we're excited about is that computing power is getting better and better. A lot of you know about Moore's Law. And right now, this is a plot of computing power as a function of time. And right now, computers are about as smart as a lizard or a guppy. If this trend keeps going, computers will be as smart as humans in about 30 years. That's called a singularity. Watch out, could be good, could be bad. But in any case, we will be able to do some very good SETI experiments. Right now, we're just getting in the game. We're learning how to do it. We can't do all the frequencies and do a thorough search. But if computing power keeps going, the telescopes keep getting better, I'm optimistic in the long run that there are radio signals out there, could be found maybe in your generation, maybe in the next generation. Okay, if you've been asleep, this is really the only slide you have to remember. No ET so far. We're still working on it. However, that is not my last slide. I've got 3 more. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about the SETI at Home volunteers. The SETI at Home volunteers have helped us enormously. They built one of the biggest computers on the planet, made a very sensitive search, but they also help us write the software. It's a big open source project. They help make it go faster, port it to new platforms. They just got it working on Android. They get the bugs out. They also send us money. The donations come from the volunteers, which is great because it keeps the students working on analyzing the data, keeps the students fed. Then they also send in literature and music, and some send haikus. And thousands of people have sent us haikus about SETI. But don't worry, I'm not going to read you thousands of haikus. I'm just going to read you a couple of haikus. So Paula Cook at Duke University, searching for life, answers are revealed about ourselves. And this is the last slide, the last haiku. 1 million Earthlings, bounded by optimism, leave their PCs on. Well, thank you very much.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what I'm going to leave you tonight with. Thank you very much for attending all my classes throughout this semester. You have been a great class. Thanks for all of your participation. And I will schedule 2 more classes. So one will be recap and open question answer session before our exam. And I will schedule another one that we can go through the semester tests and answer more questions. I will upload your mock exam shortly, so in the week still, so you can practice. And I still don't know if I'm going to teach something in the 2nd semester, so maybe I will see you in the 2nd semester, maybe not. Maybe I'll see you, there's another astronomy course in 2nd year, so maybe I will see you for that course, maybe not. But I wish you guys all the best with your exams that you're writing, the best with preparations. And as soon as COVID is over, I will most likely see you all on campus again. Thank you for a great semester and have a great night, everyone. Yes, once COVID is over, I will definitely arrange a stargazing evening. I'm glad that you guys enjoyed the module. So you guys are more than welcome to log off. I'll remain active for another minute or 2. Before I forget, here is the link I was telling you guys about. Let me see if I can get it. So I'm also going to stop the recording now.